Flickering torches revealed the pale limbs of a young man chained to a damp stone bench. His shirt had been cut open at the back. Blood soaked through the linen like spilled wine. A physician crouched near the wall, eyes averted. A scribe waited with ink already blotting the parchment, and standing in silence was the Tsar, Peter the Great. Tall, broad-shouldered, once hailed as a visionary reformer. The man who dragged Russia into modernity with steam, steel, and fire. But now he said nothing. His gaze, hard and quiet, was fixed on the wrecked figure before him. A boy barely 30, hunched, trembling, marked by bruises and lashes. His own son, Tsarevich Alexei Petrovich. This was no battle, no rebellion, no outside enemy. It was blood against blood, crown against heir. And it had come to this. Just 2 decades earlier, Peter had been celebrated across Europe as the architect of a new Russia. He had built shipyards from swamps, created a navy where there had been none, waged wars, signed treaties, rewired the state with brutal precision. He trimmed beards, burned traditions, and broke the backs of boyars who clung to the past. But for all his victories, one failure followed him like a ghost. His son, Alexei, the heir to the Russian throne, was not the man Peter wanted him to be. Alexei was everything Peter wasn't. Quiet, scholarly, devout. He had no taste for war, no interest in ships or cannons or foreign alliances. He preferred books, music, the Orthodox faith. He feared violence, he avoided conflict. To some, Alexei was thoughtful, to others, weak. But to Peter, this gentle nature wasn't just disappointing, it was dangerous. How could a man who bled for Russia pass the crown to a son who refused to hold the sword? Peter called him a coward, a traitor. In private, he threatened exile. In public, he humiliated him. Letters between father and son grew colder, then stopped entirely. The world saw a proud emperor grooming his heir. But behind the walls of the Winter Palace, a slow betrayal was blooming. When Peter's first wife, Eudoxia, was sent to a convent, Alexei's isolation deepened. His new stepmother, Catherine, bore Peter more children, potential rivals. And while the court praised Peter's reforms, it whispered about the boy who would inherit them. The Tsar began to speak of succession, without using his son's name. In 1715, Peter offered Alexei a choice. Abandon the crown and become a monk, or prove yourself worthy of it. It was not a choice, it was a warning. 2 years later, Alexei vanished. He fled to Austria seeking asylum under the Holy Roman Emperor, hoping to disappear into Europe before his father's anger caught up. But the Tsar's reach was long. Peter wrote to him, promising mercy. If he returned and confessed his weakness, no punishment would follow. A son's heart overruled his fear. He came home and was immediately arrested. Now, in the bowels of the Peter and Paul fortress, Alexei lay broken. Torture sessions, interrogations, silent trials. He named conspirators, or some real, most imagined, under the weight of the knout whip. His own mistress testified. His mother wept in exile. His allies were executed one by one. But Peter did not flinch. He watched. He studied. He signed the sentence. A father condemning his son to death. The execution was never made public. No axe, no square, no trumpet. Just a fever, they said, a sickness. On June 26, 1718, Tsarevich Alexei died behind stone walls. His body ruptured, his legacy erased. No mourning was permitted, no funeral. Russia moved forward. Peter moved forward. But something in the empire had fractured. Something vital, something human. But everything changed after the Tsar realized. His empire had outlived his own blood. There are stories that history tries to forget, not because they are untrue, but because they are too intimate, too shameful. This is one of them. By the early 1700s, Peter the Great had transformed Russia. He built a navy from splinters, raised the city of St. Petersburg from a swamp, and declared war on everything backward, be it boyars, beards, or the Orthodox stranglehold on power. But his obsession with modernization masked something deeper, a rot that had nothing to do with his empire and everything to do with his son. Alexei wasn't just a disappointment, he was a contradiction. Peter wanted a warrior to inherit his throne, but Alexei was a mystic. Peter dreamt of industry. Alexei wept for the soul of Russia. The son clung to a vision of tradition that Peter had spent his life trying to destroy. Worse still, people admired him for it. To the silent courtiers, Alexei represented a gentler future, one that embraced old faith and ancient order. To Peter, that admiration felt like treason, and treason required punishment. In 1716, while Peter campaigned in Denmark, rumors began to swirl. Alexei had been writing to foreign leaders, speaking privately with priests. Some said he was gathering support for a coup. Others whispered that he might renounce the crown and flee. Then one day he vanished. Not in shadow or disguise, but in daylight, escorted by allies out of the country. He sought protection under the Holy Roman Emperor, Charles II. The message was clear. He would rather be a refugee than live under his father's eyes. Peter was enraged, not just by the betrayal, but by the optics. What kind of czar couldn't control his own blood? He launched a diplomatic assault, sent agents, promised forgiveness. Publicly, he declared, "Let the prodigal son return." Privately, he wrote to his advisors, "He must come back or be hunted like a dog." When Alexei returned in 1718, the palace gates did not open for him. He was not met by his father. There were no embraces, no ceremony, only chains. What followed was a carefully staged descent into hell. Peter convened a special tribunal, made up of senators, generals, bishops. They weren't asked to judge. They were asked to witness. Alexei was kept in the Peter and Paul fortress alone. No lawyer, no advocate, no family, just questions. And the knout. The knout was no ordinary whip. Its braided leather ends were tipped with metal hooks, designed to rip flesh, not merely bruise it. On June 19th, Alexei received 25 lashes. He screamed until his voice cracked. When he fainted, they revived him. On June 24th, he was whipped again, another 15 strikes. This time he didn't scream. He trembled, and then he spoke. Names, plots, letters written in fear and fever. He confessed to conspiring with courtiers, clergy, even his own mother. How much was true, no one knows. The tribunal recorded every word. Peter signed the confession, but he hesitated, just once. A document was prepared, the official death sentence. It required the Tsar's approval. Peter paused. This was his son, his heir, the last living thread to his first family, the boy who once held his hand as they walked along the river. But Peter had become something more than a father. He was now a symbol, and symbols have no sons, only enemies. He signed it. 2 days later, Tsarevich Alexei was declared dead of fever, but the bruises, broken ribs, and ruptured organs told a different story. Some say he died of the injuries. Others believe he was quietly strangled on Peter's command, a cleaner end to a filthy ordeal. The empire was told to forget. No mourning was permitted, no memorial raised, just silence, and the haunting knowledge that Russia's future had been buried beneath its present. And yet behind the palace walls, Peter could no longer look at mirrors, because they did not reflect victory. Only a face that once looked like his son's. There are wounds a country can heal, and then there are those that sink into the bones of history. Never seen, never named, but never gone. Russia was silent the morning after the Tsarevich's death. Not a church bell rang, not a candle was lit, and behind the gilded walls of Peter's court, no one dared speak the boy's name. Because in the heart of the empire, the most powerful man alive had done the unthinkable. He had destroyed his own blood. The official story was thin, fragile, hollow. They said Alexei died of fever. But the guards who had brought food to his cell the night before told a different tale. The boy had been curled in the corner, eyes swollen shut, teeth clattering with every breath. His back had gone purple. One rib poked unnaturally under the skin. And when they slid the wooden plate toward him, he didn't move. The autopsy was forbidden. Peter claimed it unnecessary. He ordered the body buried without procession. No monument, no crown. Just earth and secrecy and silence. But the silence was not still, because something had broken in Peter that could not be sealed with brick or buried with dirt. He stopped sleeping. When he did, he dreamed of Alexei standing in the corridor, bruised and barefoot, saying nothing. In one dream, he opened his mouth, but only blood poured out. Peter began to avoid mirrors. He removed Alexei's portraits from the palace walls, and yet the boy remained. Once during a storm, a servant claimed to see Peter in his study, clutching a torn piece of parchment with his son's signature. He was weeping. Another said the Tsar ordered his bed burned, claiming it smelled of iron and vinegar. At night, he paced the stone floors in silence, mouthing names no one else could hear. And the guilt? He never admitted it, but he turned it into ritual. Peter now visited the Peter and Paul fortress alone, the same dungeon where Alexei had been whipped. He'd stand in the center of the cell, staring at the walls. Sometimes he'd mutter, say something, but the stone never answered. Outside, Russia grew stronger. Peter pushed reforms faster than ever. He launched more campaigns, opened schools, built more ships. But inside the palace, the doors closed earlier. The air grew cold. And the man who had once dreamed of a glorious dynasty now spoke only of discipline, loyalty, sacrifice. Those closest to him noticed changes. He began using language once reserved for criminals, traitor, saboteur, enemy of the throne, to describe even minor defiance. He had once ruled like a father over a nation. Now he ruled like a warden. And still, he saw Alexei, in the corner of the throne room, in the mirror of his shaving glass, in the hands of his younger sons. Once, while reviewing soldiers, he paused at a boy with golden hair. His lips moved, but no one heard what he whispered. The boy was dismissed. He was never seen again. Peter knew he would never be remembered as just a builder or a reformer. The whispers had begun in Vienna, in Rome, even in his own Senate. He murdered his son. He could not erase that, but he could drown it. In achievement, in stone, in monuments so massive that memory would shiver beneath them. And so he tried. But even emperors cannot outrun echoes. Years later, in a rare letter, Peter scribbled one line. What is a crown if it costs the soul? No one knows who it was meant for. No one dares ask. I wonder, in those last days, when he lay sick with infection, his own body rotting from within, did he think of war, of ships, of palaces? Or did he see only a boy, eyes swollen shut, whispering from a dark cell? Father, and yet death was not the end. They say Peter the Great died surrounded by surgeons, choking on pus from his own failing bladder. The man who once commanded armies, reduced to a body that refused to obey. And yet in those final hours, beneath the weight of infection and delirium, he still spoke of duty, of reform, of the sea, but not of Alexei. Not once. There was no portrait of his son in the death chamber. No heir's seal among the royal documents. Only Peter's final decree, unfinished, ending mid-sentence. Leave all too. Some believed he had intended to name a successor. Others believed he couldn't bring himself to write the one name that truly haunted him. When news of Peter's death spread, the bells rang across Russia, but not with joy, not with mourning, with confusion. Because the man who had built a modern empire had left no heir. Alexei was gone, and with him the promise of continuity. Peter had carved monuments from stone and steel, but he had also carved a wound into the Romanov bloodline that would never truly heal. In the fortress where Alexei died, no memorial was ever built. No plaque, no tomb, no inscription. But the guards claimed the walls bled during certain rains, that sometimes in the silence you could hear the creak of the knout, or the breathless whimper of a prince, waiting for a father's mercy that would never come. Peter's chosen successor, Catherine the Renner, ruled briefly, then died. What followed was not legacy, but chaos, a series of weak rulers. Power struggles, assassinations. The dynasty had splintered, and in every shadow Alexei's absence loomed like a ghost. Some historians argue Peter's choice was necessary, that the future of Russia demanded strength, not sentiment, that Alexei would have reversed the reforms. But others say this. Peter built a modern state, but at its foundation, beneath the marble and steel, lies a boy, alone, beaten, buried in silence. In the 19th century, a young painter visited the fortress. He had read of the interrogation, of the sentence, of the death. He imagined the moment not as anger, but as tragedy, and he painted it. Peter the Great interrogates his son, a canvas of dim candlelight, sweat, grief, and silence. Peter looms above. Alexei trembles below. Two rulers, two bloodlines. Only one would survive. Centuries later, the painting still hangs in the Tretyakov Gallery in Moscow. Visitors often stop. They study Peter's face, not in judgment, but in wonder. How could a father do this? And yet, if you stand close, really close, you'll see what the painter understood. That this was not just a moment of punishment, it was a crown breaking in two. In 1997, the Russian Orthodox Church quietly added Alexei's name to the list of royal martyrs. No ceremony, no headlines, just a line in a dusty registry. But for some, it was a long overdue confession. Today, children in Russia learn of Peter as the great reformer, the builder, the warrior, the emperor. Few learn of the boy who died with his name. Few are told that under every palace he raised, under every city he planted, lies a silence too deep for history to speak aloud. No one remembers Alexei's final words. But I imagine they weren't for Russia or for mercy. I imagine they were for the man who made him. Father, why? All thrones are made of bone eventually.